All right, looks like we're live. Welcome to meeting of the Education Economic Development Subcommittee. We are joined as always by our Senate counterparts and Chair Zucker. Chairman, do you have any opening remarks?
I would just say, always great to partner with you on this. Just a reminder for everybody that I know that there's been some recommended cuts. Those cuts didn't originate from us. We are not the ones cutting you. We are reacting off of what the administration's bringing in, and we look forward to working with you.
All right, and we have quite a few witnesses today on these agencies, so we're going to limit our witness testimony to 1 minute. With that, we'll get started with our first agency, which is Canal Place, and Andrew Gray is our analyst. Andrew?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll now start with the Canal Place Preservation and Development Authority. As you see here in the first exhibit, the operating budget summary, the budget decreases around $60,000, 8.7% in fiscal 22. This is largely due to revenue constraints and also kind of going back to fiscal 2020 actual spending amounts. For the fiscal 2020 actions, there's one thing to note here, that there was a $40,000 or so rent forbearance that the Canal Place Development and Preservation Authority received as a result of concerns due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So that was funding that came from the contingency fund to allow for rent forbearance for the entities noted here in Exhibit 1. In terms of the overview of agency spending, you see that the majority of the funding for the agency comes from two categories: the personnel, the 3 regular positions at Canal Place, and then also funding for contracts. The largest contract there is for the maintenance and service work that kind of maintains the historic building. There's also funding, obviously, there for fuel and utilities to kind of maintain that operations as well. And then $25,000 in grant funding reflected there is money that's actually then dispersed to other entities. In terms of the proposed budget, once again, $60,000 decrease. Just note at the very bottom there, the majority of the changes are in the physical plant line items. This is related to, once again, constraining the fiscal 2022 spending to reflect reduced revenues, which we'll talk about more in a second. And then also, once again, getting back to those fiscal 2020 actual funding amounts. In terms of the personnel data, there is no change in the personnel complement between fiscal 2021 working appropriation and fiscal 22 allowance. The one key observation we'll discuss here is the revenue challenges and expansion plans that are kind of complicating the work of the Canal Place. So there are kind of 3 components here that we're talking about. First of all, the revenue challenges. It's already discussed. There's been some challenges with the revenues coming in from the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the concerns outlined in the fall when we were doing the baseline budget for the agencies is that there was around $133,000 or so deficiency that Department of Legislative Services identified due to revenue shortfalls due to the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad ridership and lease funding being lost because the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad has moved to across the river to West Virginia, and also underperformance of a revenue contract on a ground lease as well, kind of led to some of the kind of revenue constraints there. Although Canal Place is working to kind of bring those leases back into use. Another major component here in terms of the Canal Place's challenge is the River Park project. It's an ambitious $13.7 million project that spans multiple years. It's reflected here in Exhibit 4 with 6 phases. Funding is noted from a bunch of different sources, but very little of that has actually been received yet. And just one thing to note here is that Canal Place's role in this is a facilitator, and it's not the kind of overarching kind of entity kind of controlling this project, but they're facilitating this project, and it is an ambitious project. And the question is, do they have the resources in order to kind of bring that to fruition? And then finally, in terms of Canal Place's future, there have been legislation in recent years to reauthorize the task force on the Canal Place Preservation Development Authority to kind of look at its overall mission to see where it fits into the state's overall plan in terms of its being a state entity or whether it needs to be kind of spun off in some way. While the most recent iteration of that legislation did require a report by September 1, 2020, the report to date has not been submitted. Another piece of legislation in recent years, the Chapter 207 of 2020, established a task force on the economic future of Western Maryland. And in short here, this looked at kind of the economic development components of Western Maryland, but not necessarily economic tourism, heritage tourism that was reflected by Canal Place. So it seemed a little odd that Canal Place was not included in that kind of overarching look in terms of at least the draft recommendations that have come out so far. From my understanding, that final report has not been submitted from that task force, and there's legislation to reestablish or to kind of extend its work. Department of Legislative Services recommends that Canal Place discuss the status of lease vacancy filling, general status of its revenues relative to its ongoing spending needs, and the prognosis for its ongoing solvency. And DLS also recommends that Canal Place discuss whether it has the capacity to conduct the scope of the River Park project and whether administrative resources is bringing to bear in order to complete the project. And finally, comment on the relative merits of continuing as a state agency, being privatized, or having its responsibilities transferred to other existing organizations. And then Exhibit 5 on the next page just reflects here that the visitors declined steeply between 2019 and 2020 due to the pandemic. The remainder of the visitors for 2020 are the Great Allegheny Plateau trail riders, and there's obviously due to the interest in staying outdoors and enjoying the ability to recreate safely outdoors. In terms of the recommended action here is to concur with the governor's allowance, and unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gray, for the great analysis. Any questions for our analyst? I don't see any. Chair Zucker nodding his head no. Okay. So we will move on to the agency. Ms. Janice Keane and her team. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay, wonderful. Yes, I'm Janice Keane. I'm the volunteer chair of the Canal Place Preservation and Development Authority. And with me today also is Dee Dee Ritchie, who's the executive director of the authority. And before we get into our brief comments, we just wanted to thank Andrew Gray for his support in going through the guiding us through the budget analysis for this year. We would like to briefly address some of the issues that Andrew had identified. First, with regard to our lease vacancies, they are only within the Western Maryland Railroad Station part of the property, but there were tourism businesses in that property that were affected, of course, very much by the pandemic. And so as we've notified DGS, we have been advertising, we've been working with the local board of realtors and done a multiple listing as well. And now that the positivity rate appears to be decreasing, which is wonderful, we're seeing a significant amount of interest in leasing those spaces. So that's recent development. We're very pleased with that. With regard to the overall budget of Canal Place and its spending needs, generally, Canal Place is very active with its leases, its parking revenues, and also obtaining grant funding to help make up any budget shortfalls. And usually the budget shortfalls are due to capital maintenance issues with the Western Maryland Railroad Station, which is an old building, old state building, and also sometimes with the canal shops and various infrastructure. But since we have now been recognized by DGS as a state agency, we are not part of the capital maintenance budget. And so when we often have to request general fund money in order to help maintain that facility. And so that's part of what you saw in the budget shortfall this past year. We had assumed we would be getting before the pandemic, some nice ridership, additional ridership money, et cetera, and hotel tax money. And so we were going to be able to pay for more of the capital maintenance things that we need to do on the railway station, but that did not happen. And so you saw it appeared that we had a shortfall. With regard to the River Park project, there is general consensus at the local, state, and federal level in terms of the stakeholders in that potential project that it could be a significant source of economic development for the region, and in terms of other areas that have done similar park projects that have resulted in multiple millions of dollars of additional revenue. So of course, we were interested in that because Canal Place is the backbone site of where the project would occur. But up to this date, as Andrew had said, we really just been a facilitator on the administrative side in helping to coordinate meetings and bringing all the stakeholders together to do all of the preliminary planning work that would have to occur with a project of this size. And one of the things that the stakeholders have said is that we are very lucky compared to many other parts of the country that have undertaken these types of projects, that we really have all of the points of interest already in place. We have to connect the dots and provide access to them, which is what this project will do. It is currently scheduled that there will be a meeting next month between the City of Cumberland and Allegheny County and Canal Place to determine who is going to be responsible for future maintenance and ownership of this project. But the stakeholders do agree that there are significant sources of grant funding as well as mitigation banking that can help fund the project in the long term. But right now, our role is facilitator. Dee Dee, do you want to address the structure of the Canal Place Authority going forward?
Right. We've been working, of course, with the Canal Place Task Force Study Committee. Of course, Canal Place, we would like to remain a state agency because we generate over 80% of our operating costs right now. We do receive $128,000 of general funds from the state of Maryland, but as Janice told you earlier, that's for complete maintenance of the grounds and for any capital maintenance that we would have to do on any of the buildings. DGS has recognized us as a state agency, but we're not included in any of the capital maintenance when it comes to doing any repair work on our building. So that would help us tremendously if DGS would include us. We have talked about privatization of the shops. That is a possibility. However, that's going to require infrastructure changes. Right now, a lot of our utilities are all tied together. So that would all have to be separated in order to sell off those buildings. So that would have to be done. And also, they've talked about leasing our festival grounds. We have a 3-acre festival grounds with a stage. We've been in discussions about leasing them to the City of Cumberland. That would help our maintenance budget a lot if we didn't have to maintain those grounds. We can't have big festivals there anymore because, well, number one, because of COVID, and number two, we used to have a position for a coordinator that would bring in various entertainment, but we don't have that position anymore. And I mean, again, on top of that, we're like less than 0.1% of the state budget as far as receiving general funds. So we're gonna, keep on operating as we have, trying to fill up the vacancies with the station, and hopefully that'll help us out some.
Okay, thank you so much for your testimony.
Sure.
Are there any questions for the agency? Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a quick question. We were talking earlier about with the railroads move to Ridgely, West Virginia, they get a substantial amount of money from the state. Is your hope that they're going to come back when COVID returns, or are they now sort of vacating the station? I know that their rail yard is right across the river, but is their long-term plan now to actually like start their rides there as opposed to the Canal Place, or are you hoping that they'll come back to the station when things return to some level of normalcy?
Dee Dee, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, we've been approached about them coming back to the station. Of course, we'd love to have them come back because they bring in over 40,000 additional tourists into Allegheny County. And therefore that helps our shops out. And of course that helped us with our lease revenues. So we're going to try to work with the railroad. We hope that they succeed, and we hope that they come back to the station. So yes.
What was the reason that they gave you for moving? Was it just a cost savings mechanism through the pandemic?
Yes, it was basically COVID because, you know, you're in close quarters when you're riding on those cars and you couldn't safely social distance. Plus, it was going to require a whole lot of maintenance money that they didn't have to even run the trains. They would have operated in the negative had they run that way.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and I don't see any other questions, Mr. Chairman. Don't see any questions on your side either. So with that, we'll turn to our next agency, EED Community Colleges. We have Ian Klein, our analyst. Mr. Klein, you're on.
Right, just give me one moment. Okay, you should at this point be seeing the EED Community College analysis, correct?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, great. So what you have before you is the analysis. Funding for community colleges in the state is primarily funded through formulas, with the most prominent being the Senator John A. Cade funding formula. Additional funding is also provided to support retirement payments for community college employees. As shown in the operating budget summary, the fiscal 2022 budget grows by $14.1 million or 4.3% from fiscal 21 to 2022. However, as noted in the bullets on page 2, when additional one-time fiscal 2021 coronavirus aid relief and economic security or CARES Act funding, Governor's Emergency Education Relief or GEAR funding, and supplemental budget funding, altogether totaling $27.4 million, is included, the fiscal 2022 budget decreases $13.3 million or 3.7% relative to the adjusted fiscal 2021 working appropriation. Turning to page 6, we can review the successful persister rates for the community colleges. Persister rates are the means by which we evaluate whether or not community college students are successfully meeting their goals. This includes only students who have attempted at least 18 credits in their first 2 years after enrolling at the college, and then who after 4 years are either still enrolled, have graduated, or have transferred. Those students would then be considered successful persisters. As you can see in Exhibit 1, the rate in Maryland has held fairly level at around 70% for these students. Turn to page 2, Exhibit 7, you can see the persister rate broken down into 3 categories. Those being students who entered as college ready, students who required developmental courses and completed it, as well as students who did not complete required developmental coursework. As you can see, the developmental completers persist at a rate that is nearly level as college ready students, though they don't graduate or transfer at quite the same rate. Meanwhile, developmental non-completers are far less likely to persist. This emphasizes the importance of students completing their developmental coursework. Exhibit 3 on page 8 shows the successful persister rate by community colleges composed of the groups I just mentioned. As you can see, Allegheny College has the lowest persister rate in the state, while Hartford Community College has the highest persister rate at over 80%. Exhibit 4 on page 9 shows how community colleges are performing with their students who require developmental coursework. As shown, Allegheny College had the highest portion of its students require developmental coursework at 88%. Frederick Community College clears its students through developmental coursework at the highest rate, with 89% of its students who need that coursework completing it, while Prince George's Community College has by far the lowest, with 36% of its students completing their required developmental coursework. Exhibit 5 on page 10 shows the distribution of the different categories of students in the state. As shown in the exhibit, just under 30% of students are considered non-persisters. The largest portion of this total are the developmental non-completers, which represent 16.1% of the total cohort. Moving on to page 11, I'll speak about the graduation rate and transfer treatment gap for minority students in the state, which is shown in Exhibit 6. This gap is illustrated in the exhibit with both African American and Hispanic students falling below the all students category. Since 2011, all groups have experienced growth in the 4-year graduation and transfer rates. Exhibits 7 and 8 on pages 12 and 13 look at enrollment at the community colleges. As seen in Exhibit 7 on page 12, there has been a steady decline in FTE's enrollment for in-county credit students, which peaked in 2012. As can be seen in the exhibit, there's also been a marked decline in both in-county credit FTEs and non-credit FTEs as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Exhibit 8 on page 13 provides the total enrollment over the same period. This exhibit tells a similar story, with total enrollment peaking in 2011 and steadily declining through 2020. It should be noted that the fall 2020 total utilizes opening fall enrollment figures, which may be subject to modification in the future. Once again, the drop in total enrollment from 2019 to 2020 is evident as a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic. Total enrollment has declined by 27.1% from the 2011 record high mark when compared to the 2020 total. Moving to the financial impact that the COVID-19 pandemic had on the respective community colleges. To ensure the safety of its students and personnel, the community colleges shifted to online and virtual instruction in the spring. As shown in Exhibit 9 on page 14, the closure of these institutions affected revenues in auxiliary enterprises, tuition and fees, increased COVID-19 related expenditures, and other lost revenues, which totaled over $30 million in fiscal 2020. Respective community colleges utilized CARES Act funding, as summarized in Appendix 2, to offset these losses. When operating and personnel reductions were included, the community colleges were able to eliminate their fiscal 2020 deficits. For the fall 2020 semester, many community colleges reopened campuses and modified learning environments so that in-person instruction would be conducted in a socially distanced structure and limited the number of students who could be in a classroom at a single time. As shown in Exhibit 10 on page 16, the limiting of the number of students per class resulted in a reduction in tuition and fee revenue that totaled $33.5 million. When the Board of Public Works reduction of $39.6 million is included, along with continued loss in auxiliary revenue, increased COVID-19 operational costs, and other lost revenues, the community college's fiscal 2021 shortfall totaled just over $100 million when including Baltimore City Community College. Utilizing multiple relief funding sources, the community colleges have offset $29 million of this shortfall, leaving a remaining balance of $71.6 million. It should be noted, and is shown in Exhibit 11 on page 17, that the community colleges will be receiving $120.4 million in Consolidated Appropriations Act funding, of which $92.4 million could be used to offset additional COVID-19 related losses. DLS asked the Executive Director of the Maryland Association of Community Colleges to comment on how the community colleges could utilize CAA funding and what operational actions will be taken to eliminate the remaining $71.6 million fiscal 2021 budget shortfall. The Executive Director should also discuss plans for utilizing Relief Act funds. DLS also asked the Executive Director to comment on how the transition to a remote environment has shifted the thinking of how community colleges will deliver programs and services, opportunities this opens to the respective community colleges, and the impact this will have on the community college's business model. Finally, the Executive Director should also comment on how rural broadband issues have impacted educational delivery for the affected community colleges. The discussion of the fiscal 2022 allowance is summarized on page 19, where Exhibit 12 shows the distribution for the different categories of funding. As shown, funding for the CADE formula makes up over 3/4 of total funding, while retirement is the next highest portion at just over 18%. Exhibit 13 on the following page shows the changes in funding from fiscal 2021. The most significant change is found in the CADE formula, which increases by $13.8 million. There is a total 4.3% increase in the aid to community colleges funding when compared to fiscal 2021. However, as previously mentioned, when the one-time funding total of $27.4 million is included, the fiscal 2022 budget decrease is $13.3 million, or 3.7% relative to the 2021 adjusted working appropriation. Exhibit 14 on page 21 provides the breakdown of CADE funding from the 2021 actual to the fiscal 2022 current law and the 2022 BRFA. As is shown in the exhibit under the 2022 current law column, the CADE funding formula is set to increase by $40.4 million to $290.1 million, an increase of 16.2%. The 2022 BRFA would limit growth in the CADE formula to 5.5%, with total funding growing from $249.7 million to $263.5 million. In addition to the change in the funding level, the BRFA also proposes to alter the CADE funding formula beginning in fiscal 2023 and each subsequent year, such that total state funds to be distributed to each community college shall be the amount of aid provided to that college in the current fiscal year, as approved in the state budget, increased by the percentage by which the projected general fund revenues for the upcoming fiscal year exceed the revised estimate of total general fund revenues for the current fiscal year, as contained in the December report of estimated revenues. This system would delink the CADE funding formula from the audited levels of FTEs and funding provided to the selected public four-year institutions. Exhibit 15 on page 22 provides a breakdown of how that proposal would impact CADE funding in future fiscal years. As is shown in the exhibit, beginning in fiscal 2023, the differences will grow in each successive fiscal year. Total mandate relief that would be achieved from fiscal 2022 through 2026 would reach $147.5 million. Exhibit 16 on page 23 compares the allocation of fiscal 2022 funding under the BRFA to an allocation of the same amount of funding taking into account updated enrollment by community college. If the BRFA savings had been achieved through this formula, rather than a uniform growth rate, 6 community colleges would have received more funding. Moving to the issues, which begin on page 24, the one issue discussed focuses on tuition, fees, and student aid for community colleges. Exhibit 17 on page 24 illustrates that tuition and fees at Maryland's community colleges had been growing. In 2020, the average tuition and fee level for Maryland community colleges was $4,811, which is over $1,000 greater than the national average. It should also be noted that in fiscal 2020, the growth in tuition and fees at Maryland's community colleges declined when compared to the national average for the first time since fiscal 2012. If you'll turn to the next page, you can see tuition and fee rates by community college. In Exhibit 18, the dotted line is the maximum federal Pell Grant amount that a student can receive. You can see based on where that line is in the graph how much that line would cover. In-county tuition for all of the state community colleges would be met, but only at Hagerstown Community College and Baltimore City Community College would out-of-county tuition be met. Montgomery College in particular has a very high out-of-county tuition rate. In fact, the rate is more along the lines of the public four-year institutions in the state rather than the state's community colleges. Exhibit 19 on page 26 shows institutional aid and Pell Grant aid provided. Pell Grant aid is significantly higher than institutional aid, with $124.8 million being provided in fiscal 2020. This data is self-reported by the community colleges to the Maryland Association of Community Colleges and DLS. I should note that the declines in Pell Grant aid provided should not be especially surprising, given the overall declines in the community college enrollment that were previously discussed. Additionally, the institutional aid numbers do not include CARES Act emergency student financial assistance. If you'll turn to page 26, Exhibit 20 shows the institutional aid awards by institution. Allegheny College provides the greatest institutional aid awards per 100 FTEs to its students, at 62 per 100 FTEs. Prince George's Community College gives the largest average per student with institutional aid reaching nearly $2,300. This may have to do with the fact that Prince George's has implemented a Promise Scholarship, but you can also see that on the chart that the usage of the scholarship may not be very high, as it's only reporting 10 awards per 100 FTEs. The DLS recommended action is found on page 28, and that is to concur with the governor's allowance. And with that, I conclude my presentation and would be happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Klein, for a great analysis. Are there any questions for our analyst? Mr. Klein, if you could just stop sharing so we can see the participants. Thank you, sir. I don't see any. Mr. Zucker? No, see any. Chair Zucker? Okay. We will turn to the agencies. We'll start with MHAC and Secretary Fiedler and your team. Please introduce anyone that you intend to have speak. Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Barnes and Chairman Zucker. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Joining me today are Assistant Secretary Jeffrey Newman, who's been with the agency now 18 years. So he's been here and has seen a lot of the ups and downs, and have seen in this tumultuous year the tremendous leadership that has occurred at the community college level. Also joining me is Dr. Barbara Smertz, who will be able to address the questions regarding persister analysis in terms of the developmental courses. So we'll proceed with that in a couple of minutes here. I wanted just to remark, when we talk about it being a tumultuous year, all of us have seen that. What you haven't seen is behind the scenes collaboration between MSDE and the community colleges, with a tremendous increase in dual enrollment over the last 5 years. And that enrollment has continued even during this pandemic. The innovation that's occurred at the community college level in terms of online virtual learning delivery systems, being able to switch from face-to-face classes to use of hotspots and parking garages, furnishing students with all types of technology, has just been phenomenal. Even though the enrollment decline has continued, there are other states that have reported, just even in the spring enrollment, tremendous decreases in particular populations, in which it's too early to have hard data on that, but we're going to be watching that in terms of those that are most vulnerable in the workforce, losing those jobs, and now they're having to stay home, so they're not able to be enrolled. So some of those are the issues. I turn it over to Jeff Newman and Barbara Smertz, unless you have particular questions for me. I'm keeping it as short as I can.
We'll take questions for your team at the end.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Jeff Newman, Assistant Secretary for Finance and Administration. I'm just here to respond to the analysis with MHEC concurs with the governor's budget as proposed.
Okay, any questions for MHEC?
I'm here for questions.
Excellent. Mr. Chairman, I think you have a question on your side.
Yep, Senator Elfreth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, good to see you or hear you.
Yes.
I think when I looked through this budget, and obviously we've all been very concerned, particularly for our community colleges. Oh, there you go.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Particularly for our community colleges, they don't have, as we all know, they don't have the endowments that the 4 years have to help kind of cushion the blow of lost revenue because of the pandemic, but also the BPW cuts that were experienced in July. So they're already 76 million in the hole collectively, and then this extra CADE cut is just of concern. So how do you envision they make up for that lost revenue and this CADE cut?
I don't think there's no easy answer for making up for that revenue. The pushes, the contacts that we've had with the U.S. Department of Education, federal level, to make sure they understand the plight of the community colleges and the importance of the community college, especially during this pandemic and the workforce decrease for the people who need it most. It's so crucial. As you know, we've moved over to start to fund scholarships for non-credit courses in addition, so that can help some of the individuals who are looking toward apprenticeships and certificates and licensure. So what we're trying to do is say, what can we do to help not only the students, but the institutions? And the institutions have, like I said, been extremely innovative. Howard Community College has volunteered to be a vaccination site, and I believe your president will be on this afternoon to answer additional questions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
On our side, we have Delegate Forbes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Chronicle for Higher Education reported that there was a staggering drop-off of low-income students going straight from high school to college, and many of them were headed to community colleges. Is there anything being done to try to capture those? Because there's a feeling that if those students, once they got off track, they may never get back on again. So
no, that's Delegate Forbes, that's an excellent question and an excellent observation. It's one that we've had conversations about. The Promise program that was started just a couple of years ago in terms of scholarships for the community college students. That's aimed at that type of thing. But one of the difficulties is for the students that are at the lowest income level, do they have access to broadband? Do they have technology at home that can support not just a handheld? It really needs to be a laptop in terms of delivering these courses. So all those things are continuing to be examined. And like I said, we have data from one of the states that 20% decrease in Latino population specifically. We don't have any facts and figures, so it's all anecdotal right now, but we're trying to take a look at if that is occurring, what can we do to support the colleges as well as the students? It's going to be a tremendous problem, because once someone drops out and thinks, okay, I'll go right back to school, they get a full-time job, a family happens, whatever, there are reasons that they may not rejoin, and that gap becomes 1 year, 2 year. We also have a near completer programs, which doesn't specifically address this issue. It's more for those that are 75% through versus those that are just at high school moving into college.
thank you for that. But whatever we can do to support that and try to reach out to those students and get them started in community college, the state will be better for it.
Now, I would agree with you. And one of the other things I would observe is we know that at the federal level, the student debt is $1.6 trillion. Whatever can be done to decrease the stigma for students that are afraid to start out in college for fear of having a big mortgage in terms of a student debt they have to pay for 20 years. We have parents now reporting that they're still paying their student debt and they have children in college. So it's a super large issue it's outside of Maryland, but we need to deal with it on the ground here.
Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Delegate Forbes. Secretary, Senator Alford asked you how we get this money back to these community colleges, and I'm not sure I heard a real clear answer. One thing we could do is reject the governor's cut. We could do that, I guess.
As you know, we're supporting the governor's recommendations.
Yeah, okay. I appreciate your time. We're going to turn it over.
To Dr. Smertz.
You have Dr. Smertz who wants to testify? Sure, absolutely.
I have nothing to share at this time. Thank you.
Okay. All right, well, thank you for joining us today. We'll turn it over to the community colleges. We have Bernie Sadusky, the executive director, and his team. And Mr. Sadusky, I'll let you introduce your presidents and anyone else that you want to testify.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and we really appreciate the opportunity to address a very difficult conversation. And the conversation is, how do we restore the additional $26 million cut that's being proposed? We obviously cannot support or concur with the governor's allowance if it has a BRFA in it. We're going to fight that at another hearing, but the issue before us is community colleges are facing the fiscal crisis. Our entire increase in operating budget last year of $36.2 million was rescinded. And then on top of that, we're looking at another $26.2 million. So if we total the rebasing that we've faced since 2018, the total is now about $140 million. Compounded with COVID, the unexpected outcome with COVID is decreasing enrollment, where students coming out of high school are doing daycare. They can't afford to do this. They've lost jobs. 80% of our folks work, so they can't afford to come to college. That is a perfect storm for a fiscal crisis for community colleges. We're here to say today, the analysts did a great job. Our folks are working in a new reality, but the fact is we need your help. We need your financial help. We are committed, even in this fiscal crisis, as recently as last month when we surveyed our presidents, they are committed not to raise tuition because that's a losing proposition for us. We're trying to get the kids back to college, and if we raise tuition and they couldn't afford it in the first place, I mean, you know, we got to get out of that circle. So what we're here today is to ask for your support. You've always supported us. We appreciate that. You've asked us to comment on 2 questions, and I'm fortunate to have 2 presidents here today. Dr. Kate Hetherington from Howard Community College and Dr. James Klauber from Hagerstown Community College. And they're going to answer the 2 questions from a practitioner standpoint. So I would like to call on Dr. Kate Hetherington to address this group.
Great, Dr. Hetherington, welcome.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for hearing us. And thank you for those comments about the what should we do with the governor's projected cut, Chair Barnes. As you heard from Dr. Sadusky, we are very discouraged about these cuts because what they do is they impact the work that we're trying to do. And one of the things that I want to keep in mind is when we get out of this pandemic, and we will, community colleges are going to be looked at to provide workforce training. We are already the #1 workforce trainers in our counties. So how can we do that if we keep getting cut? So I've been asked to address a couple of questions, and Dr. Klauber will address them as well. But the ones I was asked to talk about was, how do we transition from this remote environment going forward? And I just want to let you know that it's almost a year ago now, March of 2020, within a 2.5-week period of time, we moved from pretty much all face-to-face classes to everything online within 2.5 weeks. That says something about the ability of our faculty and staff to really pivot when we have to in order to serve our students. So we have been doing online for about 20 years, but not to this degree. So during this past summer and fall, we opened up our classes to more hybrid. We offered synchronous remote classes, and we expanded again this past spring. And across the Maryland's community colleges, they're all pretty much doing the same thing. Now we're looking ahead to fall, and what's that going to look like? And there are challenges. We've talked a little bit about those already, but we will be guided by whatever social distancing and availability of the faculty and staff to teach and provide these services, the availability of the vaccine. Dr. Fiedler talked about how Howard Community College is a mass vaccination site. Our gym is no longer our gym. It's really the county's place for doing mass vaccinations, and they're doing them every single day of the week, except for even on the weekends we're doing them. And hundreds of people are getting vaccinations in our county because of us, Howard Community College, being a true partner. Again, we can only do this with the support that's needed. So what has happened with this delivery of services? Well, when we go back, we learned a lot. We learned about how there is truly some silver linings. For example, mental health and depression, anxiety are at an all-time high, as we have heard across the country, but particularly among college students. And what we have found moving to online is that we went from face-to-face counseling to telecounseling, and the students actually love it. And it's a very effective tool in helping our students during this very challenging time. And so post-pandemic, we see us going in that direction, along with many other services where it's just easier to do academic advising. There's no time for a student to take time off of work to go see an advisor. They can just schedule an appointment from the convenience of their home. So there's many things that we have learned in terms of delivery of service. I do think teleworking will become a new part of how we do our work. And so we are learning many lessons. So it's there's some positive things, if we can think of positive things coming out of this pandemic. One of the things I also want to talk about is how we're going to be teaching going forward. We already have our faculty, and we had started to do this pre-pandemic. We hired a consultant to come in and look at all our programs and which ones were the ones that were growing, which ones really need to think about differently. And do we need to always have an associate's degree? Maybe some of these short-term learning programs are more effective putting people right to work. So we're learning more about stackable credentials. We had done that previously with students who wanted to start off with the nursing program, with the certified nursing assistant program, and then move into an RN program. Well, we're looking at more programs like that, particularly in the area of cybersecurity. We're putting together cyber certificates that people need, and then they go to work. Then they come back, get more certificates, and get job advancement. So community colleges have always been known for lifelong learning. And that's what our future is. Our future is not just students right out of high school, because you know where we're taking the hit. We're taking the hit not only in the declining enrollments just because the number of students aren't there right out of high school, but we're really taking a hit in the adult learner. Those people are home watching their kids. They've lost their jobs. We have to come up with the jobs of the future, and that's what we're working on right now. The last thing I want to mention is the issue about access. And, people don't think of Howard County as a county with issues related to poverty. Well, almost half of our students receive some type of financial aid, and this was pre-pandemic. This past semester, when you put in the CARES funding, that number shot up to about 63% of our students getting some type of aid. But what we found is we had to provide laptops, hotspots, and it's not just the students. Even our employees didn't have laptops and hotspots at home. So we have, through the CARES funding, been able to provide that. But again, that CARES funding is like, it's one time, it's done. And the majority of what we've been able to spend it on, and Dr. Klauber will talk about this in a minute, is supporting students. It really isn't helping our operations at all. So, and one final thing, we had Delegate Forbes, you talked about what are we doing with low income students, students of color. Well, we are doing a definite outreach to these students. We have some programs at Howard that are particularly directed to men of color and also Latino Hispanic students. And so we're working within the high schools to make students think about college, to talk to them about the financial aid opportunities and get them enrolled in dually enrolled courses. We had the second highest dually enrolled enrollment in Howard Community College this past semester through those efforts. So thank you.
Well, Thank you very much for your testimony and being with us today and all the great work you do for our students in our state. Dr. Klauber, I'm assuming you're also going to be testifying. You're on.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Great pleasure to be with you today, and I'll try and be brief. I tell you, Delegate Forbes, it was one thing that when you asked your question, just brought to mind an incident I had at the college back last summer. Ran into one of our PTK honor students. She was an SGA, fantastic young lady. Husband's in prison. She lives with her mama. She got 3 children. And I saw her out in the community during the summer. I said, you know, are you coming back in the fall? We're looking forward to seeing you finish that 2nd year. She says, no, I'm not coming back. She said, I just can't come back. She said, my children are going to be in virtual school, and my mother won't be able to take care of them and watch over them all day long. And, you know, I've got to work some, and it's just not going to happen. Something has to go, and my education's going to have to go this year. And I'm just going to have to put it on the side, and I'll just be back next year. Well, I hope she comes back. But, you know, her story is a story I've heard time and time and time again. I'm sure every one of you are hearing it across the state, but I think it's particularly endemic at the community colleges. Now, one thing I want to talk with you about are these budget cuts. Sure, we've gotten a lot of funding for the CARES Act. We're going to get a lot of funding through the CARISA Act. But there are 2 fundamental problems with those federal appropriation laws. Number one is non-recurring money. It does not go to our base and provide us with a sustainable source of revenue where we can subsidize the cost of providing education. That's the biggest problem. But the second biggest problem is, and I spoke with Congressman Trone about this one time when we were on the phone right after the CARES Act got passed. There's so many different restrictions on how that money is spent. We hadn't been able to spend it all. We made a commitment that we were going to be able to serve the least of these, the folks who needed developmental education, the folks who needed ESL, the folks who needed GED. We were going to do that in a face-to-face, socially distanced format come heck or high water this year. And we were able to do it. Well, CARES Act didn't cover that. We had to pay for the foggers, the sanitation, the extra custodial staff. All of that came out of our budgetary hide, but it was a decision that we made, that we wanted to make, because we felt like those students would not be successful in a virtual environment. And it was just a choice that we made here at HCC to do that. But all of that money that comes from the federal government it's so hamstrung with restrictions, it almost makes you fearful in many instances to draw it down, because you don't know what the federal auditors are going to say 2 or 3 years later. It's a real challenge. And listen, we've been very blessed with the GEARS Act money, money that goes to people to help provide for quick start training to get individuals trained for jobs, especially those who've been displaced by this pandemic. It's great. However, I'm a simple person, and I best put things in simple terms. It's a little bit like me running a restaurant. The governor's out giving coupons for free hamburgers. I'm happy to give away free hamburgers, but the problem is I still have to make the hamburger. I still have the cost involved in making that. I still have the cost involved in providing those technical programs that are usually on the upper end of the expense scale to those students. How do I do that? I do it through great CADE funding and full CADE funding, and working towards that full CADE formula. I don't do that with a cut down to 5.5%. That is going to curtail our ability to be able to provide that type of funding, even if a student comes to us with, a GEARS Act scholarship. And so those are some of the real challenges we face, and why this BRFA needs to be defeated, and we need to move forward with the original budget formula. I think if you do that, you really set us on a course to come out of this pandemic even stronger than we ever were before. And, for that, subject to your questions, I certainly would ask that you adopt the original budgetary language and not those contained in the BRFA.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Klauber. We love the tux today. Looking good.
It's just a bow tie and a suit.
My mom always said, dress for the budget you want, not the budget you have. So we'll see what we can do about getting you a tux budget by the end of this session.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much for what you do for our students. Are there questions? Mr. Sadusky, do you have any other witnesses before we get to questions?
I do not.
Okay. Are there any questions for our community colleges?
The only thing I'd add, Mr. Chairman, is last year there was a recommended cut of 18 million for CADE, and our two committees worked together to do what we could.
Good. We're proud to do that. Yep.
Yeah. Bow tie and all.
Well, good. Well, that completes our community colleges agency portion, and I will turn it over to Chair Zucker, who will deal with our state aided institutions and educational organizations.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're now going to turn our attention to
Chair Zucker, I think I missed one witnesses in community colleges. I'm
Yes,
so
that's
sorry.
right. That's
Yeah,
right.
I'm so sorry. Mr. Torres, I apologize. I know you've been here, you've been waiting patiently, and we would not forget you.
Thank you. I'll try to keep this brief then. Well, good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Stephen Torres, and I am an adjunct instructor at Howard Community College. I'm also an advocate with SEIU Local 500. I'm here today to speak in support of fully funding the CADE funding formula for community colleges. From giving direction and purpose to underachieving and underserved communities of students, to providing affordable training to those who have been displaced in the recently volatile job market, community college is essential in the fabric of American society as we try to bridge the growing gap between rich and poor. Underfunding our community colleges exacerbates the problem of income inequality for our students and our instructors. Prior to the pandemic, Maryland's community colleges were underfunded for a decade, and providing adequate levels of funding to educate students is a critical step in helping community colleges fulfill their original promise of serving as catalysts for social mobility for students, instructors, and the communities our colleges serve, and offering a path forward in a post-COVID economy. I ask that you fully fund the CADE funding formula. The state must do its part in fully funding the institutions that will help Maryland recover after this pandemic is over. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Any questions for Mr. Torres? Okay, well, thank you for being with us, and apologize. Chair Zucker.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Torres. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're now going to move on to Maryland State Department of Education funding for educational organizations. Prior to this call, Chair Barnes and I were talking, and the state aided institutions, the SAIs, are very important to us. We are not going to be cutting any of the SAIs. So when you testify, please make sure that you just try to keep your comments to 1 minute. We believe that relief, especially during the era of COVID, is important. So we're looking to help bolster you up and help, not hurt you all. So with that, let's go to the analyst, Laura Hyde, for the analysis on this budget. Ms. Hyde.
All right, thank you very much.
And we see you.
Thank you. So we're starting on page 1 with the operating budget summary. The fiscal 22 increase reflects an additional $2.6 million in special funds for the broadening options and opportunities for Student Stay Boost program. This is offset by a decrease in $546,000 for other institutions programming. Maryland School for the Blind, BISM, and the Aid to Non-Public Schools program are level funded in this budget. If you could please look on to Exhibit 3, that's on page 7. This is the overview of agency spending. You can see that special funds account for $16 million of this budget, and general funds account for $30 million of this budget. Look at Exhibit 4. This is the general fund allowance. You can see that Maryland School for the Blind receives $25 million. Other institutions receive $5 million, and Blind Industry Services of Maryland receive approximately $1 million. You look on to Exhibit 5. This is the special fund allowance. You can see that Aid to Non-Public Schools receives $6 million in this budget, and Boost receives $10 million in this budget. You look on to Exhibit 6. This is on page 10. You can see what I was just speaking about, the fiscal 22 allowance. It's $46.3 million, with the change being approximately $2.1 million and a percent change of 4.7%. The Boost program receives $2.6 million, and other institutions have a decrease of approximately $546,000. The other institutions' budget is determined by MSDE and the Maryland State Board of Education, who selects applicants from the State Aided Institutions Grant Program, which provides state funds to nonprofit organizations that offer educational programming to Maryland students. This list is forwarded to the governor for consideration, which determines the SAI grants. This list includes the same 58 institutions that received allocations in fiscal 21, also receive an allocation in fiscal 22. And as we mentioned previously, the fiscal 2021 cost containment actions included a 10% cut to SAI grants as part of the BPW cuts. And then this budget reflects an additional 10% reduction, bringing the program currently to $4.9 million. If you turn to Exhibit 9, this is Maryland School for the Blind's revenues and expenditures. You can see that the total revenues for Maryland School for the Blind in 2021 are $35.3 million. This represents the percentage of state and local revenue sources, approximately 94% of that budget. And their expenses are $40.8 million. This represents revenues less expenses of approximately $5.6 million. You can look on page 15. This is Exhibit 10. This shows that Maryland School for the Blind is receiving COVID-19 related available funds. They're receiving approximately $119 million in local funding, $200,000 in ESSER funding, $228,000 in Gear 1 funding, and $253,000 in Gear 2 funding. This goes towards an approximate $1.1 million in anticipated spending on COVID-19 related expenses. We're moving now to the issues. This is on page 16, Exhibit 11. This is for Maryland School for the Blind. In 2019, Maryland School for the Blind conducted a self-study on how the school might overcome persistent budget challenges. In 2020, the Budget Committee has asked MSB to continue this work and provide additional information, including financial projections through 2023, as well as analyze MSB's formula funding. This second study revealed that the primary challenge to MSB's increasing expenditures is rising personnel costs. In the past 3 years, Maryland School for the Blind has seen a steady increase in cost associated with salaries, wages, and benefits, which accounts for approximately 70% of their total spending. MSB has a projected increase in personnel costs from fiscal 21 to fiscal 22 of approximately $8.2 million or 30%, and a growth of $11.4 million or 48% when compared to actual fiscal 2020 spending. These increases are primarily related to cost of living adjustments and rising costs to provide living wages and commensurate benefits. Now moving on to the second issue. This involves Boost. So this is pointing out that standardized assessment requirements for Boost were waived due to COVID-19 school closures. Boost schools did not administer these assessments in spring 2020. However, a ruling determined that they will remain eligible for the Boost program in the 2020-2021 school year. If you turn to Exhibit 12 on page 19, this is the Boost current appropriation and fund balance with total funds available for awards in the 2020-2021 school year of $7.7 million and total awards offered and accepted as of December 2020 of $7.1 million with a remaining balance of $622,961. If you turn to Exhibit 13, this is on page 20. The last two lines indicate, you can see the 3-year average amount of awards accepted is approximately $7 million and the 3-year average balance remaining is approximately $700,000. You look at Exhibit 14 on page 21. You look at the line that says adjusted award, special education. The budget committees have recommended in the past that the special education awards total $700,000. This year they are $482,800, and the adjusted award for high school is $695,000. And total amount awarded, including declined awards, is $8.4 million. DLS recommends that the Boost Advisory Board and MSD explain why special education awards total $482,800 instead of the $700,000 allocated for these awards in fiscal 2021, and recommends reducing Boost funding in line with the fiscal 2021 level budget, including the remaining balance. If you turn to page 22, this is non-public schools. This is just pointing out that the governor announced $35.8 million for Maryland non-public schools as part of the SRSA Act. And DLS recommends to the budget committees that MSD report on the distribution of these grants. On the next page is operating budget recommended actions. And I'm bringing this to your attention just because this is the amended language and the added language from last year's fiscal 2021 budget. The first two amends are to the aid to non-public schools textbook program, including submitting a student handbook and changes to the FRPM percentages. The third recommended action is non-public schools participation in non-discriminatory practices. The fourth amendment involves schools having participated in the aid to non-public schools program in the year before to be eligible for boost. And the fifth set of language involves standardized assessments and changes to non-discriminatory language as well as reporting requirements. This ends my presentation and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Ms. Hyde, thank you very much for that thoughtful analysis. Is there any questions for the analyst? I don't see any on my side. Chair Barnes, I don't think I see any on your side. So we'll now turn to the superintendent, Dr. Salmon, for a response.
Good afternoon, Senator Zucker and Chair Barnes. It's great to see everybody again. I'm Karen Salmon, the State Superintendent of Schools, and I have with me today Emily Brandenburg, who is our Deputy Superintendent for Finance and Administration, and Mr. Robert Hare from the Maryland School for the Blind will respond to questions about the Maryland School for the Blind. Regarding the analysis, thank you, Laura, for a very thorough review. And as always, we appreciate the legislature for all of your support with our programs in education, as well as the governor's budget as well for funding for educational organizations. I'm going to jump right into the analysis concerning the recommendation to consider increasing the annual training goal hours for the fiscal year 22. The Maryland Industries and Services of Maryland will take this suggestion under consideration. Concerning the BOOST program unspent funds, this program requires significant forecasting and projections. With only a few years of data and operating in a COVID world, it was difficult to determine the percentage of eligible students that will ultimately enroll, their eligibility category, non-BOOST financial aid, and who would qualify for the special education adjustment and other factors. We were asked to explain why the fiscal year 21 special education awards totaled nearly $500,000 rather than the $700,000 allocated for these awards. Chapter 19 of the Acts of 2020 reserves $700,000 of the program's appropriation to provide additional awards for students with special needs that is at least equal to the scholarship award. The amount reserved for special education award was an arbitrary figure. The amount of the special education adjustment is predicted on the number of special education students that applied. On average, 6% of the scholarships that are distributed include an adjustment for special education. To be eligible for a special education award adjustment, participating schools must indicate the BOOST scholarship student is a student with special needs and also provide documentation of the needs and services for that particular student. Students with special needs receive 2 times the actual scholarship award. Additionally, a number of other factors have to be considered in determining a student's total scholarship amount, such as eligibility category, tuition, non-BOOST financial aid, and special needs. It has been the program's practice to ensure that the total scholarship award does not exceed the cost of tuition minus any non-BOOST financial aid. As such, it's possible that the legislative set aside is not consistent with our programs or with the BOOST program's experience. DLS also recommended reducing BOOST funding in line with the fiscal year 21 level. MSDE respectfully disagrees and supports the governor's allowance. For the 2021 school year, there was not enough funding to provide scholarships to all eligible participants and applicants. Concerning the operating budget recommended actions with respect to amending language, MSDE concurs with all of the suggestions. Thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Hi, Commissioners of Campus, is Emily Dow calling.
Are there any questions for the superintendent before we turn it over to Superintendent hair. Senator Elfreth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, Madam Superintendent. Sorry, we just had the Secretary of Higher Ed here.
That's okay. I answer to anything really at this point.
I had a quick question about SAIs. I represent Chesapeake Bay Foundation, which is traditionally for, I think they were one of the originals. I think there were around 18 originals that going back decades that received that support. They were cut last year and they remain cut this year. So can you give me a little background? It's in my district. A lot of the students in my district are served. Why CBF no longer fit the criteria, or what they did wrong, or what kind of analysis was used to make that decision?
I'm going to turn that over to Emily Brandenburg, who has a summary of what all the programs we're doing this year during the COVID, because they had to make a lot of adaptations, as you can imagine. So we may have some information relative to that. So I'm going to give her the floor to see if she can look over and see if we have that information. If not, we'll be happy to get back to you if she can't find it.
Thank you, Dr. Salmon. And I've pulled it up, and unfortunately, it is one that I don't have. So if we could get back to you, that would be much appreciated. I'm missing the Chesapeake Bay Foundation on our list.
Okay, I would appreciate that. It's, again, one of the originals. It's a great program. And 2 years now, they've taken quite the hit by not being included here. So I know it's important to the entire state, particularly important to my district. Thank you.
The problem is they've been left off a lot of lists, it looks like. So, Chair Barnes, I think you've got folks on your end.
And I am surprised to hear that the agency is unaware of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation cuts and did not come prepared to speak about them, but that'd be great if you can get back to us. Delegate Solomon.
Yeah, Senator Elfreth really took my question. I mean, I know particularly they've really adapted. I mean, actually, I was just going to say, a lot of these programs, particularly the theaters, have adapted and have been doing amazing online work. So I think I was frustrated by the cut sort of across the board to SAIs, because a lot of these programs have, I mean, to say they're operating on bare bones is, I think, an understatement, but they've really adapted and are doing amazing work, reaching, in some cases, actually more students doing online work than they did with their in-person work. So, just really would appreciate, I think, taking a more critical lens of some of that funding. And I also wanted to thank you, Dr. Salmon, for the response on the childcare conversation that we had last week. I appreciated the rapid turnaround on that. So thank you. Thank you.
And if I can follow up, Mr. Chairman, I don't see any other questions. Dr. Salmon, you'd agree that this SAI funding is vital for these organizations. I mean, a lot of these organizations are surviving on shoestring budgets and.
Right. I've actually been working behind the scenes with some of these organizations to try to look at other ways for funding and other grant programs. So I certainly agree with you that they're foundational, and I appreciate your
I'm glad you brought up other ways, because I do have legislation that I hope that your department can come support to mandate the funding going forward, since we're going to see sort of what appears to be, and we haven't heard any justification, arbitrary cuts to some of these organizations. So I hope you'll be with us at the hearing. I know that Chair Zucker is supporting legislation on his side that is sponsored by Chair Gazzone. So I hope you guys can support that, because these organizations really are depending on these grants, and I hope you can be at that hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I hope you stay for everybody's.
I'm definitely going to stay. Absolutely. I'll be here.
Good. Senator Elfreth.
Thank you, Mr. I almost forgot. Madam Superintendent, when do you expect we can get an understanding of the aid to non-public schools? The 36 million, I think, was the number that the governor put out. Just so we understand where that money went, what it's used for, all of that.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Emily to give us a little more information on that, Senator, because we've been working on that. As you can imagine, with all of these funds that have been pushed out, we have been, I will say, not overwhelmed, but we've been busy trying to push out the grants. So I'm going to ask Emily to respond to that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Salmon. This is part of the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation Act of 2021. Maryland was one of the first states to apply for the funding. We received our funding on January 23rd. You have 30 days in which to release an application for our non-public schools, which clearly will be coming forthwith. At that point, the USAID recommends keeping the application period open for about 30 days. And then once you receive the applications, you have another 30 days in which to compile the information and decide what services and assistance you'll be able to provide to your non-public schools. So we are working diligently on this program. The recommendation for the narrative is that this report is due by July 1st of 2021, and we will absolutely have that done for you before then. But that's the information in a nutshell. Are you looking for anything additional?
Just, I think we've put a lot of thought, particularly into taxpayer money going to certain schools as it relates to Boost, and to make sure that we're not using any public funds towards schools that could possibly be discriminating against students. And I would like to also be assured that this money would follow that same criteria.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Any additional questions for the superintendent before we move on to the superintendent of the Maryland School for the Blind? Okay, I don't see any. Mr. Hare, welcome, superintendent for the Maryland School of the Blind, for your responses. Good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. Thank you, everybody. I'll keep my comments brief as well. I know, Laura, thank you for your thorough analysis, and you covered a lot of things. I want to hit some key points. First of all, I want to introduce, I have with me Miriam Malauer. She's the chair of the board of directors for the Maryland School for the Blind. And also, I believe Kibian Vasquez, our CFO, is here to answer hard questions about math. So without further ado, just the high points in the report that we provided in November, of course, were to go over revenue and expenses, capital improvement and maintenance, and also how we might become a state school, what the considerations would be. Building on the previous study, which the key finding in the previous study was that our students have become progressively much more multiply disabled, at least in the on-campus program. We serve students across the state in their local schools, but the ones on campus that have replaced the ones that were mainstreamed back 40 years ago have been replaced by students with cognitive and significant physical disabilities and behavioral issues. You know, our staff have to feed, toilet, bathe, brush their teeth hand over hand, helping these very complicated and the least among us kind of students that we have in our state. And over the years, the funding formula never really kept pace with that complicated type of student. So over the years, we've just contained costs by leaving positions unfilled, not increasing the number of FTEs, even though our enrollment has gone up, cutting our health insurance benefits, and in some cases paying wages that are far below market. So in this report, what I want to highlight is some of the key findings. Our paraprofessionals are paid 30% less than their Baltimore County school counterparts. We lose these people all the time. It's very difficult to recruit them. We are, in effect, a minimum wage employer. There's a $5.34 difference between the starting pay with us versus Baltimore County. The formula for the School for the Deaf and the School for the Blind, as we learned in the study, are identical. They are exactly the same. And 30 years ago, we were funded exactly the same under that same formula. However, somehow over the years, it has gone completely different. So currently, the calculation for the base grant for MSB students based on a per pupil rate is 15% lower than the School for the Deaf, resulting in a 3.6 million funding discrepancy between the two schools. I don't know how that happened. I think it just happened organically over time. But this is really standing out to us because our students are so much more complex than the students at the School for the Deaf. In fact, the School for the Deaf shared with us that they have around 10% that are in that category of multiply impaired compared to the School for the Blind students. And also our school, we have a greater proportion of students that are residential. 44% of the students at the School for the Blind compared to the School for the Deaf, which has 16% residential. And for students that are very complex, it's very expensive to provide residential services for our students compared to School for the Deaf, especially in terms of just the sheer numbers of the number of students you have to supervise. So we also discovered that the School for the Deaf has this mechanism in this education statutes for a pay plan approval process. So they present every 3 years with their budget, what it costs to compensate their staff adequately in comparison to Frederick and Columbia or Howard. And so we don't have anything like that for us. So that's a critical piece that we feel has one of the main drivers for our amount being so far behind, because in the formula, it always starts with last year's calculation. So it starts off with that, the main, whatever it was last year, and then how many students you have and how, all of these other pieces. But ours is just so far behind that we can't catch up even with the same number of students or more students or less students. So we also looked at the capital maintenance plan. It'll cost around 18.6 million, according to our study, over the next 10 years to maintain the beautiful campus that we have. It'll also, there's more money that's needed for replacing aging buildings. We also looked at the state agency model, and with legislation, we could become a state agency. However, without an infusion of additional funding, it really wouldn't help our current position. So the leadership team and the board of directors maintains that the main solutions are in resetting that base formula to be with parity with the School for the Deaf, possibly adding weights based on disability category or residential status, and instituting a process for reviewing compensation. The consequences of not changing the funding structure would be cutting services and essential programs, which we haven't had to do so far, but we stretched our staff so thin. Without our services, students could be at greater risk of being placed at out-of-state programs, such as at Perkins School for the Blind, which I've shared with all of you, I think, individually. I used to work there. I had out-of-state students. I had a day student from California, for a $500,000 out-of-state placement. We appreciate the opportunity to share the findings of the report. And I also appreciate the fact that Senator Zucker and Delegate Barnes have presented legislation regarding this pay plan issue. So we really are so grateful. We feel like this is a huge potential step in helping us correct this parity issue with the School for the Deaf. Thank you. We look forward to working with you and continuing our service in our vital mission to our students.
Thank you very much. And I know Chairman Barnes and I look forward to continue to work with you and do what we can as individuals and in both committees to help. Are there any questions for the superintendent? Chairman Barnes, I don't see any on my end. All right. Well, let's move on now to, thank you very much, Mr. Superintendent and Madam Superintendent, appreciate it. We'll now move into the public witness part. I just wanted to, thank everyone who signed up to testify verbally. Just a reminder that it is our intent not to cut the SAIs, the state aided institutions. So if you can please keep your testimony to a minute or less, it'd be great. We also wanted to take this time, Chairman Barnes and I, to thank the more than 50 people who submitted written testimony, and we'll make sure that we review that and pay just as much attention to the written testimony as we do to the verbal testimony. We're going to start off first with Mr. Potter with the Maryland Science Center, and I wanted to give Rachel with Best Buddies a heads up that she'll be immediately following Mr. Potter. So with that, Maryland Science Center.
Thank you, chairs and members of the committee. You have my written testimony. I just wanted to share with you that despite the COVID challenges, the Science Center continues to live its mission to inspire, empower, and engage through innovative programming enjoyed in person at our Inner Harbor location and through countless program offerings available to students, teachers, and others online. In fact, since the pandemic began almost a year ago, over 875,000 people have viewed at least one of our online offerings. We continue to meet the goals and aims of the SAI program. These funds help us bring STEM education into the homes of students and educators across Maryland when schools cannot come to us. I did want to take this opportunity to thank the governor and the legislature for your support during this difficult time. However, I do request that the legislature restore the 20% cut in the SAI funding contained in the governor's budget. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We'll now move to Rachel Koulopoulos with Best Buddies, which are Best Buddies to us. We love Best Buddies, so please.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to right away turn it over to our State Director, Laura. Laura, are you on?
I am, yes.
Go ahead, Laura.
Hello, my name is Laura Nicolini, and I'm the State Director for Best Buddies Maryland. And Best Buddies works to create inclusive school communities for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their typical peers. Two of our students are here with us today to tell you about our work. Catherine and Hari.
My name is Catherine Contreras, and I go to Wooten High School. I didn't know what a disability was before I joined the Best Buddies Friendship Program. This program has allowed me to build a meaningful friendship with Hari Cannon.
My name is Hari Cannon. Catherine and I have a very unique and supportive friendship. I've known Catherine for 4 years now. and throughout this time, we have had lots of fun and great moments. Catherine has pushed me to present pieces and to be an advocate for inclusion.
Hari inspires and motivates me to advocate for disability rights. The friendship program of Best Buddies has truly changed both of our lives and has allowed us to grow into inclusion advocates while strengthening our friendship. Thank you, Hari, for being my best friend, and thank you, legislators, for listening.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Hari. That was fantastic testimony. I couldn't have said it. We couldn't have said it better ourselves. So thank you for being such a great advocate and keep up the great work with Best Buddies. Thank you for that. We'll now go to Leroy Nesbitt with the Black and Latino Student Fund. You can start anytime. Just make sure you unmute yourself. Just make sure we're having a little technical issues. Try it one more time, and then I'll come back to you. Okay, I'm gonna come back to Leroy Nesbitt. Let's go to Sarah Mickey with the Baltimore Jewish Council.
Hi, good afternoon, Chairs Barnes and Zucker and members of the subcommittee. I'm Sarah Mirsky-Mickey. I'm the Deputy Director of the Baltimore Jewish Council, which represents the Associated Jewish Community Federation of Baltimore and all of its agencies, as well as the Organized Jewish Community of Baltimore. I'm here today in support of full funding for the non-public textbooks and technology program, as well as the Boost Scholarship Program for low-income families in Maryland. Both of these programs are immensely important to the Jewish community, as well as to all families in the state who want their children to succeed in the best school for them. Many parents send their children to non-public schools to give them an opportunity for advancement and for a school setting where they can receive the opportunities they need to succeed. This is uniquely true for the Jewish community because children are often unable to participate in extracurricular activities in public schools, including the arts and sports programs, because those events are generally scheduled to take place on Friday nights and Saturdays. You have my written testimony, and you will hear from parents who have been positively impacted by the program, and you will hear about from other advocates about how more students, especially students from public schools, have applied this past year than ever. I'll not take up any more time, but please feel free to ask me any other questions. With that, I ask for a favorable report for full funding of the textbooks program and the Boost Scholarship Program. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the testimony. We'll now go to Natasha Blake McDowell with the College Bound Foundation.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you for taking the time today to hear testimony in support of the good work that is made possible by the Maryland State Department of Education, state-aided educational institutions. My name is Natasha Blake McDowell, and I'm the Associate Program Director for High Schools at College Bound Foundation located in Baltimore City. On behalf of the College Bound Foundation, and as a proud member of the Maryland Alliance of SAI organizations, I'm testifying in support of the state-aided institutions grant program. With the support of MSDE SAI funding, the following college access activities and accomplishments were made possible in 2019 and 2020. In conjunction with the guidance department, we chaperoned and sent nearly 1,000 students on 27 college tours across Maryland, the Mid-Atlantic area. We delivered 583 college access presentations to over 8,000 students through group meetings and grades 9 through 12. We also conducted over 10,000 one-on-one sessions with 3,800 students to discuss college options, admissions, SAT and ACT registration, and financial aid. We also assisted 2,000 seniors in applying to college, secure over 2,000 acceptances to 2- and 4-year colleges and universities. Restoring funding to MSDE SAI organizations in the FY 2022 budget will help the museums, outdoor centers, STEM labs, and many other organizations that make student learning unique and compelling to survive this unprecedented disruption to our operations and continue delivering high quality curriculum supporting education programs into the future. Thank you for the consideration of restored funding.
Well, thank you for your.
Mr. Zucker?
Yes.
Can you still allow me to speak for 30 seconds?
Of course. You're next. Thank you. Let me first thank you, Ms. Blake McDowell. Thank you very much. Mr. Nesbitt, you're on. Welcome.
Thank you.
I didn't forget about you. You're on.
Thank you. We appreciate your smile and your patience and your leadership in leading this session. My name is Leroy Nesbitt. I'm from the Black Student Fund. We are one of America's oldest organizations dedicated to offering independent school choice to families of color. I'm here to support the Boost Amendment and to boost the funding and to ask for all you can do. I'll make this brief and speak to 3 points. Number one, school choice is an important piece of American culture now, and the Boost funding provides that opportunity. Number two, in the pandemic era and in this era of racial reckoning, the support of Boost programs has been important to demonstrate the state's willingness to do all that it can to support groups that are historically underrepresented. And then finally, I'd like to just say that I think that it's good to note that school choice and options through Boost for Maryland families has allowed them to benefit from the many non-public schools in the state of Maryland who've been able to reopen in very tough times. Sir, thank you for your time. Thank your committee, and please fund the Boost funding as much as possible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nesbitt, and thank you for your time. We'll now turn to Alicia Jordan, Archdiocese of Baltimore, the MML School.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you for allowing this time for me to talk. My name is Alicia Jordan, and I am the principal of Mother Mary Lane Catholic School, and I'm here to speak about the Boost Scholarship funding. Mother Mary Lane Catholic School will be the new home for the students currently attending St. James and John's and Holy Angels Catholic School, which are located in Baltimore City. The majority of the students currently receive financial aid, including funding from the Boost Scholarship Program. The Boost Scholarship Program provides opportunities for families to give their children the quality education that they deserve. Boost helps narrow the achievement gap for low-income students. As a principal, I've seen so many students come through Boost move academically, emotionally, and physically when they arrive at our school building. Without the Boost Scholarship Program, Catholic education would not be possible for many of our families. Since 2016, over 10,000 scholarships have been awarded. And as a principal, I've seen so many families who are benefactors of the Boost Scholarship Award. The joy I see in their faces and in the families' faces in their lives for attending an archdiocese school is unexplainable. The Boost Scholarship Program will allow current Boost Scholarship recipients to continue their Catholic education at Mother Mary Lane and allow children from the neighborhoods surrounding Mother Mary Lane Catholic School to attend. So nearly all our students who attend a Catholic high school or Catholic elementary school graduate, with the vast majority going on to college and becoming contributors and leaders in our community. So I once again thank you for this opportunity for consideration and renewing the Boost Scholarship.
Well, thank you very much for that testimony. I don't see any questions, so we'll now go to Ariel Sadwin with Agadoth Israel of Maryland and Maryland Cape. Welcome. Just make sure you take yourself off mute. There you go.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Chair Zucker, Chair Barnes, members of the two subcommittees. I appreciate the opportunity to address you today in support of the non-public school allocations, the textbook program, and the Boost Scholarship Program. My name is Rabbi Ariel Sadwin. I'm the Executive Director of Agadoth Israel of Maryland, representing more than 10,000 students attending 30 Jewish day schools across Maryland. And I serve as the President of Maryland Cape, our state's non-public school coalition, representing approximately 120,000 students attending 1,000 non-public schools, the majority of which have been providing with extreme care and caution in-person education throughout the year, and to that we're very thankful. Nearly all of the 20 participating Jewish day schools are categorized in the highest category of farms income reporting, some with considerably higher percentages, all demonstrating the great financial need. All of our schools have disavowed discrimination. They sign the required assurance documents to ensure that all of our schools are compliant with student assessments. Obviously, it was mentioned by the analysts that this year they waived the requirement due to COVID. But this year, the full intent is to continue those assessments as they were doing previously. All of our schools have adapted the other mandated requirements placed on non-public schools who participate in these programs. This program is working. It's achieving its intent. It's providing benefits to a worthy population, a low-income population, the majority of which are minority families. It's tax-paying population. who are largely unable to utilize the full benefits of the taxes they are paying. But most importantly, children are getting a solid education in the environment that their parents find most suitable. We thank you for your support of this program. We thank the governor, legislative leaders. We thank MSDE, the superintendent, deputy superintendent, the entire team for their support over the years. We seek the full funding in the budget for, especially in a year like this, where there's the lower income population has been critically impacted. And there's so many more families who are now in that category because of COVID. So thank you again for your support. And we support the full funding and request your support as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. We'll now go to Dana Vickers-Shelley with the ACLU.
Thank you very much, Chairman and committee members. I'm Dana Vickers-Shelley, Executive Director of the ACLU of Maryland. We have long opposed taxpayer subsidies for private and religious schools in the many and increasing forms that have taken place in our state, from vouchers, subsidies for textbooks and technology, and subsidies to maintain and improve private school buildings. This year, the ACLU strongly opposes Governor Hogan's proposed expansion of the Boost program by $2.6 million to a total of $10 million. The vast majority of schools that receive subsidies from Boost are religious schools, which improperly entangles public taxpayer dollars with religious teachings. Undeniable evidence has surfaced to expose the reality that some Boost-funded schools are in fact operating with discriminatory practices. There remain serious transparency concerns about what government dollars are supporting religious teachings and whether those policies and practices are in line with the strong, inclusive, anti-discrimination standards that govern our public schools. The ACLU urges that the General Assembly end the Boost program. Thank you very much for hearing my testimony today. We have submitted a full document for your reading consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Can I just ask a question to the ACLU? Thanks for being with us. We've seen some court rulings come down. I see Tina Dove is testifying later, and she may be speaking to some of these as well, but I figured while we had the ACLU, on this discrimination issue, we've seen some court rulings come down, and we know the recent makeup of the Supreme Court. Can you just speak to that a little bit and what our anti-discrimination language, whether that is in good stead or whether that may be in some danger given the makeup of the courts and what we've seen with some of the local rulings?
Well, without stealing my colleague Tina Dove's her thunder here, we are very concerned. It's something that we're monitoring because it is very, very important that we not use government funds for private schools, which we have many concerns about the discriminatory practices that are happening in some of those schools. So it's something that we are very closely following.
And I can follow up with Tina. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions? See any? Tom Ackerman with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the subcommittees. And thank you for your continued support of the SAI program and SAI organizations. As a former Hartford County Public Schools teacher, I can attest firsthand to the tremendous value that SAIs bring to teaching and learning across Maryland, including a partnership I had with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. I'm now the Vice President for Education for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. And as this committee pointed out earlier, for the second year in a row, we've been the only state-aided institution who's currently active to have our contract with the state zeroed out. Every year, we educate over 10,000 Maryland students in every school district in the state. And we lead opportunities that are often these students' first chance to get out on the water and experience the Chesapeake Bay, whether you're from Crellin Elementary in Garrett County, or you're a seventh grader at Waverly Middle School in Baltimore City, or you're a biology student at Blair High School in Montgomery County, or an AP Environmental Science student at Bennett High School in Salisbury, and thousands of classes in between. Maryland has an environmental literacy graduation requirement, which is important because it prepares our students as citizens and as workers for the 21st century economy. And the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and other environmental education organizations help support this directly. Maryland is committed to environmental education, and that's also important for the commitments that we've made to the health of our local environment and our bay. Our students need to be the protectors of our natural resources. That's why these programs are so important. We have used our our state aided institution money in the past to help waive our fees for Title I and high farms rate schools. And frankly, our schools and school systems depend on the Chesapeake Bay Foundation to provide this kind of unique opportunity for students to be able to get out on the water, see what's below the waterline, and use state-of-the-art technological equipment to do real science and learn about how their communities upstream impact that water quality in communities, honestly, downstream. Without this funding, we are struggling. It was brought up by the committee that due to the pandemic, we're no longer bringing in the same kind of revenue from our fees. We're still trying to do everything that we can do to provide these opportunities online. And it's frankly nothing compared to what we usually get. And these state aided funds are core to us continuing this. So I hope that the committee will do everything that it can in its power to restore this funding so that the next generation of Maryland students can enjoy and can learn from these powerful science learning opportunities.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you heard the comments that Senator Elfreth made and Chair Barnes and others made.
I did, and I appreciate them very much.
Good, of course. Keep up the great work, and thank you. We'll now go to Michelle Weiss-Gerber with the Anne Arundel County Public Schools. Welcome.
Hello, thank you. I come here today as an educator in a unique position. I've benefited from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation educational experience as both a teacher and a student. 30 years ago, I engaged in a life-changing experience with the Chesapeake Bay as part of a summer program where I crawled through muddy marsh, canoed 20 miles down the Choptank, and stayed on Smith Island. Today, I'm an educator who brings these opportunities to my students. Despite teaching students who live near the bay, it is always surprising to me how many students do not have authentic water experiences. With the assistance of the educational team at CBF, I've been able to provide students opportunities to ride on historic skipjacks or to cast a seining net at the beaches of the Merrill Center. There's nothing more joyous for me as an educator than to watch students have their first authentic watershed experience as their socks fill with water, their hands are covered with mud, and they've forgotten all about the cell phone that's sitting back in their backpack. The pandemic has shown us more than ever the importance of connecting students to nature. In fact, adults need to connect a little more to nature as well. Please consider restoring funding so that Chesapeake Bay Foundation may continue to offer the educational programming for the students and teachers of Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you for that testimony. I don't see any questions, so we're going to go to Sherry Yesnick with Montgomery County Public Schools. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. I am a 7th grade science teacher at Montgomery County Public Schools. I am a highly qualified teacher and National Board Certified Teacher twice. For nearly 2 decades, I've taken students on 5 different CBF destinations, and I know it's the gold standard. There's nothing like a CBF trip. They are action-packed learning opportunities unavailable anywhere else in the state. CBF educators are experts on an enormous array of topics, from boat navigation to the life stages of an oyster. But what's most impressive every time I take a trip is how well they meet the needs of my middle school students. Middle school students learn best when they're active, when they're curious. A CBF trip, when students are on a CBF trip, they're moving, they're talking, they're fishing, they're collecting data, they're researching. What they're doing matters to them. And they bring that back to our school. Experiencing the bay in a canoe or on a research boat, it can't be replaced by an internet video. Without the CBF trip, they wouldn't know the taste of the brackish water or the sulfur smell of the marsh muck. Without CBF, they wouldn't catch the largest carp of the season, rescue garbage from the marsh, kiss a fish, or touch the gooey inside of an oyster, all things that my students have done. Almost everyone falls in love with their natural heritage on these trips. For some, it's their first experience in the water. For all, it's a deepening awareness of the bay as a national treasure to respect and to protect. I am one teacher at just one school. Imagine the impact that CBF has when multiplied by the network of teachers participating in their programs from all over our state. Restore funding so our students can learn to treasure the Chesapeake.
Thank you, and your passion is evident around this. And I thought, did you testify last year?
Yes, thank you for not cutting me off this time.
Yeah, I remember. So I gotta make sure. I always try to remember the Montgomery County Public School teachers or any school teacher at this point. But thank you for your testimony. We'll now go to Chris Holland with MASO Leadership Organization.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Chris Holland. I'm the Executive Director at the B&O Railroad Museum, and today I'm representing the Maryland Alliance of State-Aided Institution Organizations, MASO. Collectively, MASO represents 44 independent nonprofit organizations serving 24 school districts in the state, spanning all of the Maryland counties, as well as Baltimore City. In 2019, we served over 582,000 students, 11,000 teachers, 31,000 chaperones, and 1,000 Title I schools. And we provide informal experiential education in the fields of history, environmental science, theater, art, and you have our membership directory, lots more. And we respectfully request that, we support the FY22 budget, but we would like to see the cuts that were made to the SAI program, a total of 20% now over the past 2 years, be reversed with supplemental funding to restore the program to its FY20 level. And a logical question that you might ask is, how did our programs do during 2020 calendar year with the disruption of online, in-person learning? And we're happy to report that our organizations pivoted very quickly to provide virtual and distance learning opportunities at a time when, frankly, teachers were desperately in need of virtual curricula. In short, MASO organizations stepped up, and we're proud of that. We provided virtual programming, physical take-home learning, oftentimes in conjunction with meals and other services. And while we have been providing these services, it must be noted that many of our own organizations are at risk of not surviving the pandemic. For example, 1 in 3 museums nationwide are projected to permanently close. And once a museum closes, it's gone. They don't come back. So all sources of funding are really essential at this time. It's not the time for cuts. So on behalf of our 44 organizational members, MASO respectfully requests that the MSDE SAI program funding be restored to FY20 levels, and that the Chesapeake Bay Foundation be reinstated and appropriate funding with it as an SAI organization. They are proud members of MASO as well. Thank you, and we're happy to answer any questions, and we really appreciate your support. And our members have provided written testimony.
Yes, thank you very much. And again, we're not going to be doing anything. Chair Barnes and myself aren't going to do anything to cut you all. We don't have as much discretion as the governor in terms of adding funds, but we're going to make sure that we hold you harmless from here. When that go to some of the individual testimony, we'll go to Melissa Giovanni, parent.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We can hear you, please.
Yes, good afternoon, all. My name is Melissa Giovanni, and I'm the proud mother of 3 girls. Growing up, my mother wished that she could send us to private school, but it wasn't impossible due to the cost. So now, as a mother, I'm trying to accomplish my mother's dreams by having my girls attend a private school. My 2 oldest daughters have attended St. Joseph Regional in Beltsville since kindergarten. I have applied for Boost before, but didn't have the luck to be eligible because I went slightly over the amount that was needed. So this has been the first year for me to be eligible due to the fact that my husband lost his job. And I was able to receive Boost help. And having been eligible to receive the Boost help has been a blessing for our family financially. And also knowing that my child or my 2 girls can continue receiving education, values, and the continuous of thriving in the school environment. That's why I ask that you please continue with the Boost program and not take the opportunity away from our kids. This is also to raise the limit of income so more parents can take advantage of the great assistance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that testimony. We're now going to go to Milton Pascal, and then after that, we'll go to Dana Coleman. I just wanted to give you all a heads up so you can prepare to unmute yourself. You have to unmute yourself, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry about that. My name is
Go ahead.
My 2 nephews, Noel and Gabriel, Jose Gabriel, they call him Jose in school, at St. Mary's of the Mills. They went to a public school here in Laurel, but then we moved them to that private school in St. Mary's. But I just wanted to tell you a quick story about them, how they were not born in this country. They were born in El Salvador. And they had to flee They had to flee in 2012 from El Salvador because their grandfather was murdered by the gangs in El Salvador. Now, at that time, Noel was about 1.5 years, and Jose Gabriel was 7 years old. And they went through that journey as all the immigrants are coming to this country and came here and started learning the language and, and progress. As for Jose Gabriel, as he attended St. Mary's, at this moment, I am so proud of him that he's an honor student. And I am so amazed at the things that they're both able to accomplish. Noel has been able to speak English fluently and write it and read it to you. He reads it to my daughter. And, that's why the Boost program is so important to them, to their mom, because of the things they're able to accomplish from coming from a country where they didn't have anything and had to see and saw their grandfather and their uncle murdered by the gangs in El Salvador and coming to this country. And they have come a long way. And just by attending St. Mary's, I have seen so much growth in them that, as a matter of fact, Gabriel and Noel received their report cards this past week, and Gabriel had A's and B's on his report cards. And this is why it's so important for us to keep this Boost program. But thank you so much for the time to speak. Thank you.
Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to participate in this. We'll now go to Dana Coleman, and then after Dana Coleman, followed by Garrett O'Day. Dana Coleman, welcome.
Mr. Chair, I think Dana,
I don't think Dana Coleman
needed to be let into the boost or to the testimony.
Okay, so if someone sees Dana Coleman in the waiting room, if they can let him in, we'll go to Garrett O'Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of you. Garrett O'Day here with the Deputy Director with the Maryland Catholic Conference. Maryland has over around 100,000 K-12 non-public students, around 1 in 9. And these dollars have gone a long way in assisting in this time. So I just want to address, considering the opposition testimony, it's important to note that we as an organization and all of us fully supported the Blueprint for Maryland's Future and testified in support of it, including the pay raises to teachers. It was really important for Maryland. And we thank you for all of you for doing that. And these programs are also important to Maryland students as well. The Boost program in particular is a scholarship program for low-income kids. And it's a social and economic justice issue to us, particularly in the time of the pandemic. Even more so now, being that the majority of student recipients of Boost are minorities. $4.7 million in the scholarships that were awarded to students who used Boost used it to transfer to from a public school at some point. And the number of those dollars increased by $1.2 million this year. So there's huge demand. We submitted a couple amendments to the program. The first was to increase the renewal applicant income threshold so students don't get eliminated from the program for a nominal increase in income, which is consistent with what they do with the $20 million DC Opportunity Scholarship Program that our neighboring DC offers for its low-income residents, similar to Boost. I should note too, while I say that too, that there are almost 30 programs like Boost in the US, and including our neighboring DC, Pennsylvania, and Virginia all have programs just like this. The second amendment is a technical one to assist with the assessment requirements. You heard today from Alicia at Mother Mary Lang School today, which will consolidate 2 other schools in the fall to provide a stabilizing community pillar for the West Baltimore neighborhoods. And at least 100 students, we estimate, will rely on Boost for this to happen. Just a couple more highlights from this year. There was
if you can just summarize.
Sure. $11 million in demand for this program, 1,300 students on the waiting list. And last but not least, there's 950 student recipients that are English language learners in this program. So it's more needed than ever. And we thank you for your support of this program.
Thank you. And we don't see Dana Coleman in the waiting room, but feel free to any kind of follow-up that they want to have with us, not a problem. And we'll now turn to the last witness, not least, but definitely last, Tina Dove with Maryland State Education Association.
Well, being a former ball player and a sister of ball players, I do not mind batting cleanup. Good afternoon, Chairman Zucker and Chairman Barnes, members of the committee. It's so wonderful to be before you today. On behalf of the 75,000 members of the Maryland State Education Association, I beseech you to eliminate the funding for this program. The reasons for doing so have become increasingly clear, and Boost's continuance only further embroils the state in ongoing legal and discriminatory controversies. Boost is on increasingly treacherous legal terrain, particularly thanks to the 2019 Supreme Court ruling in the case of Espinosa versus Montana Department of Revenue. Continuing Boost exposes the state to the potential for years of litigation and inadvertent assistance in assisting nationwide efforts to steer public money to non-public schools. We should not be party to abetting the long-term damage this could mean for public school funding nationwide and in Maryland. The state should not implicitly condone the discriminatory practices currently governing too many of the schools who choose to take part in the Boost voucher program against, at a minimum, 2 protected classes of our students who are LGBTQ and students with disabilities. We are deeply concerned that any efforts undertaken by the members of the General Assembly with the clearly stated intent of enforcing the Boost program's prohibitions against discriminatory policies or actions would be perceived by the conservative members of the Supreme Court as an unfettered attack on religion or a legislative effort to deter public funding from going to non-public schools for no other justification than the school's parochial nature. As such, without question, this will most assuredly deem such a move as being unconstitutional. Therefore, we ardently contend that allowing the voucher program to continue, even if it is not codified in language, but is only in the budget, only increases the probability that such a defense of the program's long-term continuation only stands to make just such an attempt even more imminent. And I would offer, in part, an answer to the question posed earlier by Chairman Barnes. This is one of the numerous arguments currently being made by Bethel Ministries in their current lawsuit against the state. Finally, Boost continues to not help students. Research has shown that voucher programs don't work, and this program, since its inception, has primarily benefited families who were already sending their children to private schools. As seen in the Joint Committee report of 2021, new and renewal public school students receiving Boost vouchers still do not comprise the majority of the voucher recipients. Given the academic and opportunity gaps exacerbated by the pandemic, we can ill afford to invest in a program whose return on investment is negligible at best. I want to thank you all for your vote in support of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future by finally adequately funding our public schools and giving us the ability to provide a world-class education for all of our students. We create yet another opportunity to help the young men that Mr. Milton mentioned, his nephews, to get an education in a public school with their peers that is a better education than they could be getting through a voucher program. And the last thing I'll say in closing.
If you could summarize, please. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I want to make note of the fact that the assessments that are taken by our Boost voucher schools are norm criterion assessments. And I've raised this issue before. Those assessments are not at the same par as the criterion-based assessments that our state mandated and all of our public schools take. So we are not in a position at this point to do an apples to apples comparison of any academic outcomes of students that are receiving vouchers, because the tests they are taking could be tests that were administered when I was a child in the 70s. They are not criterion-based, they are not high quality, and we don't have evidence to prove that these programs are effective. So we ask that you end the funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. And we really appreciate everybody taking the time today to come and testify. We'd much rather meet in person, but because we're in this global pandemic, we do it virtually. That concludes today's budget hearing on Maryland State Department of Education funding for educational organizations. Mr. Chair, is there anything that you'd like to add before I close this out? Or actually, anything you want to add before I close this out?
No, I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Well, that concludes today's budget hearings. We'll look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.